Welcome to Season 2 of Mary for the Ages podcast. I'm your host, Mary, and this season is all about how the supernatural and the practical go hand in hand. Spirituality and physicality are not separate, they go together, and living rooted and grounded in your body makes way for incredible spiritual mountaintop. Our guest will be talking about how God met them at the intersection of faith and practicality. Enjoy the show! Welcome to Season 3 of the podcast. I'm Mary, and I am so very glad that you're here. Season 1 had so much amazing momentum from the amazing people that shared stories and spent time talking about process with God. And so I am just over here riding the wave into Season 2, and that is so exciting for me. This season has shaped up to be very interesting. All of the guests are really into one thing, and that is where God meets us in the practicals, and when the practical solutions become supernatural solutions. Let me explain a little bit about that. So I have seen people live in one of two extremes. One extreme is that I don't need to do anything and God will just fix it. And so my only strategy here is prayer. I need a divine intervention, and that's it. And I've also seen people live in another extreme, which is I have to do everything that I can, and I have to fix this because God is only going to fix this for me if I do X, Y, and Z. And how do I know about these extremes? Well, it's because I have personally lived in both extremes. So in 2016, I was like, as they say, on fire for God. And I love that phrase because I was, and I am. I was fasting all the time, and I was also not properly refueling my body. I was spending a lot of time doing a lot of things. I was working full time. I was in 30-hour-a-week ministry. I was also doing a great deal of inner healing and counseling. And basically I was just running on sheer emotions and adrenaline all the time. So in 2018, I kind of took stock and I was like, well, I should probably start doing certain things for my health, but I really wasn't addressing having sustainable rhythms of life that would sustain life. So I was eating pretty well. I was eating a lot of produce. I was eating organic. I wasn't eating enough food. And I was also going to grad school full time, and I was working full time, and I was sustaining a pretty untenable, uninhabitable pace of life. And that didn't lead well. And all that to say, I was not a fabulously unhealthy person. I was eating pretty clean. I was praying about what to eat. I was, seeking wisdom from God, and I was reading about what to eat. I was, mindful of allergies and sensitivities. I was doing pretty good until I wasn't. So this season is all about some of the people that I met in a season when I really was not doing so well. And, some of the things that I really had to learn to get through, and that I really had to learn how to step over some pretty significant health challenges and to overcome. So in late 2019, I had a pretty stressful incident that occurred, and without going into too much detail, I, had prayed and forgiven and had kind of walked through some, inner healing. I thought everything was great, and then 2 weeks later, my body just had a response that was outside of my control. I started regurgitating my food at random intervals, at least once a day, sometimes up to 2 or 3. And it was not purposeful. It would just happen. there wasn't anything that I could do about it. And so on top of that, my face began being covered by these boils. And so, in January 2020, I went to the doctor and I was like, hey, like, what can you do? And there wasn't a whole lot. No one could really figure out what was going on. I went to a dermatologist. I went to this. I went to that. I tried all of these things and I just couldn't figure it out and I gave up. And so by August 2020, I had just been on a service trip to finish my graduate seminary course, and I had been serving, and I got home from that. I had been fasting intermittently. I had not eaten properly in 2 months. I had already been sick going into it, and by August 2020, my face was covered in a solid sheet of boils. I began exhibiting signs of early organ failure. And looking back, there were so many things that played into that, but the bottom line was that I had spent my life living in two different extremes. One was, I need to do everything to fix whatever's going on with me, and the other extreme was, I can do nothing and I just need God to show up and fix this situation. So that's what this podcast will be about, is people that have experienced God at the intersection of practicality and the intersection of supernatural, things that we just can't explain, healing that just takes place that we can't explain. And what I've learned in probably the past 4 or 5 years, is that creating and sustaining healthy rhythms of rest, recovery, nutrition, and all of the things is equally important to just plowing through or just praying. But what I've also learned is that there are only so many practical things that we can do to help our bodies heal and recover. I am happy to say that I am very much doing well, thriving, healthy, in a good place, and that the girl that was walking through those hellacious health problems is now feeling very whole, very healthy, very, very sassy, very, very stable mentally, emotionally, and physically, because I choose now to not live in such extremes, but instead to work with my body and to work with God to create rhythms of rest and wholeness that work for me. So this podcast is all about that. And you may be saying, Mary, I just love that journey for you, but you may already be living in one or two extremes, or you may be living in a third extreme where you just have not attended to your health for a long time, and your body is starting to be like, hey, do you remember me? We live together. So you might be in that boat. This is definitely for you. You might be living in an extreme that says, nobody ever taught me how to take care of my body. I just don't know. This little season is going to be great for you. But you might also be living in an extreme where you feel that we just need to take care of our bodies and do what we can, and that's all that's ever going to happen, and God isn't going to intersect our stories with anything spiritual or supernatural. This podcast is also for you. The other option is that you may be like I was in 2016, and you may be living on adrenaline, and you may be really, really feeling disembodied, feeling separate from your physical form. You may be feeling really disconnected to your frame, which is made of holy dust, and you may not be living in connection. You might be somebody that fasts all the time and doesn't properly refuel, remineralize, rehydrate from such a thing. You might be someone that is, just walking around saying like, God will sustain, God will sustain. I would say that this podcast will also be for you, because we're going to jump into some of the twists and turns of living whole, of living healthy, of living in a wonderful, rich, whole, mental, physical, spiritual, emotional place. But I wanted to read a little bit for some of you that may be like, I don't really get a theology for this, because all the practical things that I learned to do in 2020 on to let my body be in a better place really had to do with learning that our bodies are absolutely holy and that connection to your body is not an unspiritual thing. We have this idea in the West, particularly in the West, that spiritual things are spiritual and physical things are physical, and that's just it. And God is most interested in our spirits, and how our bodies function is of no use. They had the same issue in the first century. This is not a new belief. This is not a new phenomenon. And so I would direct your attention to 2 John 7. Many deceivers have gone out into the world. They do not confess the coming of Jesus Christ in the flesh. So, a very basic tenet of Christianity or spirituality is that Jesus came in the flesh and that his life was lived in a spiritual plane. And it was also lived in a physical plane. And so we see in the book of John 21 that Christ also rose in the flesh and in fact ate a tasty breakfast of fish, hallelujah, and appeared in physical form. This is extremely important because, for starters, it's okay to be hungry and it's okay to have a meal. And it's okay that powerful spirituality is lived and embodied in a body. I would also say that I, as a person, have learned that I cannot sustain spiritual experiences without living grounded in a healthy physical body. I thought for a really long time that I could live as I wanted, basically, and that I could sustain a lifestyle where I was having dreams and visions and seer experiences and, seeing God move in powerful ways without sustaining my physical body, because I was like, well, God is just going to sustain me by spirit alone. And the truth is that the spiritual world and the physical world are interconnected on a level that we don't even fully understand. My spirit resides in my physical form, and God's spirit rests on my physical form. And divorcing the two and divorcing the care and keeping of the two gets us into really dangerous territory where we no longer understand that what happens to our physical bodies matters to God. I would argue that the physical resurrection of Jesus was one of the most cataclysmically spiritual experiences in the world of all time. And it was centered around a physical body coming back to life. Resurrection of a physical body is one of the most powerful spiritual experiences. And it is not separate from our choice to walk through life having a spiritual, physical experience, because the two things go together. I think most people are familiar with the "your body is a temple" that the Gym Bros post quite a bit, but it is true. And it is true that your body is a reflection of a spiritual reality. That's not to say that suffering doesn't happen. We'll touch on that in a later podcast. But it's also to say that your body will come back and that your body will come back physically. And we'll probably touch on that in some later episodes. Don't worry. But I would say that it is most important to remember that when you are doing something for your body, you are actually doing something that is inherently spiritual. And when you are doing something spiritual, like praying, you are also doing something that will benefit your body. And I think if there was one message that you took from this podcast today, it is this: the spiritual and the physical realms are not separate. They go together in ways that I don't even think we've ever begun to unpack. And so as you listen to guests on this podcast talk about their experiences where God met them at the intersection of practicality and spirituality, I think you're going to find that there are some helpful keys for you as we all seek to integrate the spiritual and physical experiences that we are having. Thank you for joining Mary for the Ages podcast. I am your host, Mary, and you can connect with me on maryfortheages.com, MARI for the ages.com, and that handle will also work at Mary for the Ages on Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, and Substack. To learn about upcoming courses, including my soon-to-be-released course on Living Whole, which is a healthy living course that touches on the practicalities and the theology of getting your life back in order. You can connect with me on any one of those streams. Thank you so much for joining and speaking and wishing blessings over you as you head to your day.